you just know right away.
Yeah.
There's a part of, we each have a part of ourselves that knows the answer instantly. Whether or not we're able to access that is one thing. But yeah, when you really cultivate that a little bit, it can really, really guide you in some really neat directions. And then everything else that the world is trying to tell you doesn't seem as true, or as there's a great juxtaposition that begins to form, and you realize how alive the whole entire world is when you tune into those little subtleties of life. An incredible palette where anything was sort of possible, and I began to quickly realize that there were things that he wanted to accomplish, but also he wanted to create. He wanted to transform, and it was that transformative quality that really attracted me. And I built lots of boxes, straight lines, and after a while, it kind of makes you go crazy a little bit with those crisp lines everywhere. I mean, it looks good in some applications, but after a while, you just get tired of looking at boxes all the time. And I ran out of work and ended up calling a buddy of mine who lived in Monterey, California. Told him my situation. He said, "Hey, come out to Monterey, California. I can keep you busy for at least a couple months." And he had a custom furniture shop down there. Ended up staying for 2 years. And for me, luckily, when someone tells me something's impossible, or how are we going to do that, my ear perks up just a little bit, And I think that's what kind of made this a fun project for me, was that when someone says it's not possible, or how are we going to do that, something is born inside of me, a curiosity that has really served me quite well and propelled me, and I've learned to embrace that. And then I always felt like somewhere, I always feel like that, everybody has a companion star that's watching down on them, kind of guiding them. And it's those moments when we connect with those people and we say, I knew this was the right thing, or you see how your inner child reacts to certain people. Maybe they don't feel comfortable around that person. Maybe they're hiding behind you. So you begin to trust that, and to say, you only give that person so much of your time, or you only open up so much of your heart or your soul to that experience. But if your child is very jovial and playful, then you say, this is a safe place for my heart. I can show this person my spirit. I can look this person in the eye. To orchestrate it, Kent was the orchestrator of it all. And I still think about him, just about every day, a memory comes across, or, to pick the color scheme, to pick, everything, every little detail, it all funnels from him. Just the way he redirects air currents, for the furnace and the air conditioning and the cooling. And the guy is a mad scientist, and I mean that in the best possible way. He's truly a unique individual, and I don't know how anybody could have recreated this place without that genius. And he's super technical too, and he's a perfectionist, and it's amazing. It's not like anything I've ever been around. He's very childlike, very magical. It was like a Willy Wonka, I've been a woodworker for about 18 years, and before I found this place, I worked in a custom cabinet shop for about 10 years. Hey, let's try that. And that's when kind of like a little light bulb went off in my head. I've always been a very tactile person, a dreamer, a visionary. To me, that was what I needed in a job setting, was someone to say, it doesn't work the way we want it to, but let's figure out how to make it work. So in California, I learned how to make things work, how to create something that didn't already exist, how to repair things, how to transform things. And so when I left California and came here, I drove back in my Volkswagen bus, 77 Volkswagen bus. The story that you hear where the guy was living in his bus for 2 years and kind of traveling around. And I was from Lawrence, but I had left for a couple years in California, came back, and was just looking for work. And so I was on Craigslist. It needed to be a certain level of craftsmanship, obviously. And so it was a great mixture of needing to apply your expertise, but giving kind of the full reign of artistry expression. So to me, it was very exciting. Very exciting. Where the wood shop was now, you know, the living room that looked, you know, immaculate, and it had come full, you know, fully come to its potential. I guess I wasn't too intimidated because to me it looked like kind of like not a carnival, but it was just the hard and fast rules of how something had to be done. It was more, now how do you think we can accomplish this? Here's the tools that we have. Here's the materials. How can we make this work? And when Olga would leave the house, Kent and I would kind of decide what we were going to do, you know, with some details when Olga wasn't necessarily there. And she would come back and she would kind of laugh and shake her head, and she'd accuse us of being free artists. It was a challenge to create something that didn't exist before, and to make it all. You know, I'd get here, and Kent trusted me quite a bit, which I appreciated. Our creative freedom would really kind of go unmonitored. Kent would have these crazy ideas of something that he wanted to create, and then he'd give me materials to manifest that out of. And obviously, here's some of the old spindles that he had stored away. And you know, I'd always just kind of smile at Kent and kind of nod my head, not really say much, and just kind of get to work. And if I ever hit a snag, you know, he'd bring out another box full of something else, and you know, maybe it would match up here or here, and so maybe we would cut this one off, but we would need to recreate this curve, and you know, get out the body filler, the Bondo, the epoxy, whatever it was, to shape and create and replicate. This is actually a pretty nice looking piece compared to some of the ones that we had access to, but definitely fond memories of scraping a lot of old paint, filling in holes, you know, de-stressing it to make it look, or to honor where it had been, you know. Even this piece of wood here has a right to every little crack and scar, you know, and so the object is to kind of meet it where it's at and not to try to make it something that it's not. But again, trying to make it, give it that sturdy foundation first and foremost, and then allow the character that it naturally has to come through also. So yeah, there were many times when Kent would hand me a box of interesting pieces, and we would just create, you know, and it was never a burden, or it was mostly a challenge. And we had a phrase, you know, we're after this is all done, Andy, you know, we're either going to be heroes or we're going to be goats, you know. And so we made a lot of goat sounds around here, but there were those days where we were a hero too. We went home successful. So I think Olga had a little sound device that was a goat that would make a goat sound, and when we had an idea, she would get it and she would play it. If she didn't agree with the idea, like, there was no way that was going to happen. And I believe the spring of 2011 was the first time I came out. And I think it was, and I saw an ad for a woodworker, and I thought, well, I'll give this guy a call, you know. And sure enough, it was Kent. And right away, he was a funny guy, you know. He was asking me questions like, he wanted to know if I knew the difference between a hammer and a garden hose, you know, because he'd had a hard time finding kids that knew the difference. And he needed someone who had a little bit of a solid background in woodworking, but wasn't too rigid at all either. So I ended up driving out here, and obviously seeing the place was pretty amazing. And right away, you know, Kent and Olga, I knew they were my kind of people, I guess you could say. They didn't really necessarily play by the rules all the time. You could tell there was some kind of creative genius behind the whole thing, kind of a mad scientist deal. And that's like my friend in California. He was kind of a mad scientist too. And so I decided to give it a shot, and that's kind of where it all began. You know, it was a feeling. I took a chance, and when I got out here, I could tell that the vibe was one that I would be comfortable harnessing that artistry that was inside of me. So for me, it's always been about how something feels, and the pull that you get, that, you know, following that golden thread and not pulling too hard, and seeing what shows up in your life and saying, this looks like an interesting project. I'm going to see what's here for me and how I can contribute. And it's great to be out here today. It's been about a year or so since I've been out here, and before that it had been several years. Walking around today with my wife and my 2 children. My daughter's 4 and my son is 9 months. None of them were here in the beginning. And so to show them around and have them walk through the rooms that I walked through, and to go back in my mind and imagine what it was like before this day. You know, for me, it's so much about a feeling more than anything, and just listening and really just allowing the house to show me that transformation again when I'm back here. That makes me shake a little bit. It makes me know that I'm experiencing or I'm witnessing something that's very special. Out here, you know, you never could really make a mistake. You would just be encouraged to go back to the drawing board, but with lots of support and lightheartedness. So definitely a unique project and lots of twists and turns, but that's what made it what it is. You know, all the twists and turns make it what it is. The most difficult project for me was leaving this place. Was when it was time to walk away. I didn't know why, but something told me to come here, or something told me to pick up the phone, or something told me to walk away. That's the life that I live, you know. All of it really was just. It was very playful, you know. It was serious work, but it wasn't work, you know. It was. For me, I remember the feeling and the emotions that it brought up. And it was so hard for me to walk away from this place when it was time. And Kent would call me and he'd say, you know, the Vampire Mansion is crying out for the master woodworker to come back, you know, and he'd leave me these really jovial messages on my phone to twist my arm to try to get me to come back. It always tugged at my heart, you know. I mean, there were times when we had challenges, you know, in the balconies and redirecting water, or, you know, the technical stuff. But for me, it was the hardest thing was to walk away with the project not completely finished. I've always believed that there is a road for us, and if we allow ourselves to cultivate something inside of us that allows us to gain access to these sensory perceptions, that we can see that golden thread. And we can know when we're on the right track. When we say something and a bird chirps, or when we say something and, you know, that other world kind of nudges us or winks or applauds or whistles. And it used to be that as human beings, you know, we relied heavily upon that to find food or shelter or survival. You know, we could hear the language of the plants and the trees and the animals and everything. I still dream about Olga's blintzes that she would make in the morning for breakfast. I knew I had reached a level of acceptance when I got invited over early for breakfast, and Olga would cook her Russian blintzes for breakfast, and my stomach remembers those very well. Thanks, Olga. The mad scientist side that I was talking about earlier would be that Olga coined the phrase free artist. This place is very much alive, you know, it has a spirit to it. And I feel kind of like part of that, you know, that part of that spirit, or that invisible realm that kind of knows all the different pages that have turned, you know, in the history of the project restoration. So it's pretty neat to be able to look through that lens and come back. You know, the Widow's Watch, for whatever reason, I wasn't a part of the restoration of it, but there is something about the energy of that little room. You know, it's a giant house, but there's something about that room that particularly draws me to the heart and soul of perhaps the energy that is here. And even when I talk about it now, the hair kind of stands up on the back of my neck. I always felt like, you know, Cora was always there, kind of watching over and guiding us all, gently, and that was kind of where she would kind of hang out. And so for me, that's a very magnetic room. Probably one of the smallest rooms in the house, aside from a closet, but definitely full of mystery and kind of like a portal in a way for me personally. Like that would be the place to connect with the house for reasons that I don't fully understand, but I trust because of the feeling that I get in my body, you know, when I think about that little room. And when I went up there today, you know, I don't even want to go necessarily in there, but just to stand outside of it and to kind of view it with reverence, you know, as a kind of as a sacred place where, yeah, the unexplainable kind of resides for me. And I use that to help people to reconnect with themselves. Right away, you kind of know, because that's the window to the soul, you know. Right. I try to pass that to my children because they are these like 360-degree balls of light. When I first got into this stuff, I was always very curious to become a father and to allow a child's light to just shine for as long as I could. Not to tell them that those little dust particles in the kitchen when the light shines through it's dust. They're sun fairies, you know. My daughter calls them sun fairies, and I say, of course they are. And part of me feels guilty for wanting to say, well, no, that's just dust, honey, you know, like that's the colonization of my mind. And I've done a lot of work with inner child stuff, you know, because when you can go back and you can reconnect with your inner child. Your inner child can see invisible things. It can see that golden thread. It can tell you what that plant's medicine is, whether you use the bark or the root or the berry or the flower, whether it makes your tummy feel better or helps you when you have a sore throat. As children, they can talk to plants and spirits and invisibles. So when you mend that relationship inside of you with your inner child, you can see how your child and your inner child walks around with you and says, what's that over there? And so you go check it out. And so that's always been a big part of how I've made decisions. Before I even understood it or knew how to articulate it, I pick up the phone and I talk to somebody like that interview. And
Is there other stuff we can interview you about? Yeah. Do you want to just talk about your whole life? Come back up and,
some people navigate life with their minds or with their heart or with other sensory perceptions and hoping that it would be delivered or I could pass the torch to someone who could honor what it was. I'd say that was the most challenging aspect. Everything here was fun, and like I said, Kent can remember all the stories. The biggest difference I felt when I went to California was that, you know, in the Midwest, it's easy for you to want to do something or have a dream, and for someone to say, that'll never work, or be careful for this, or yeah, I tried that, but in California, it was, do you remember this? You remember how this was before? It's almost transposed in my vision when I look at it. I can see the layers underneath.